If you listened to yesterday's episode, I mentioned why it was probably the perfect time to elevate Scott Peters to be the Cleveland Browns offensive line coach. Well, I'm an idiot. Cleveland Browns today announced Andy Dickerson is their new offensive line coach. We're going to talk about it now. Your latest Locked On Browns starts now.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined today by the OBR's Pete Smith at _P Smith _. I appreciate all of you who make Locked On Browns your first listen every single day. If you are not part of the everyday crowd, make sure you correct that. Subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. The show is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Pete, after much ado, and obviously this was a very popular name, Browns brought him in, I'd say probably 3 weeks ago, a little bit more, as a offense coordinator interview, but now will be the Cleveland Browns offensive line coach, Andy Dickerson, and as everybody knows, most recently with the Seattle Seahawks. But Pete, first thing, just doing some research, Tufts University. So the Browns again, obviously, go somebody with the academia route, but the new offensive line coach is in. Andy Dickerson comes in a slew of changes on the offensive side of the ball for the Cleveland Browns.
Right. Tufts University in Massachusetts, where he apparently doesn't want to go back. I don't blame him. Listen, he knows how
let's be honest. Look, I mean, New England might not be paying the freight right now, and we know the Browns are not being shying away from paying coaches.
Well, I mean, and it's dark at 4. Like, who wants to deal with that? Look, Andy Dickerson, whether he can coach or not to be determined. What we do know is that the Seattle Seahawks offense is sort of like, was in some ways relative to assistance when Pete Carroll was let go, was sort of like the team du jour, where Shane Waldron was hired by the Bears, and he was certainly a popular candidate for a couple jobs. I believe the Bears also hired the wide receivers coach or somebody like it. But Andy Dickerson was sort of this guy that was hanging out there, had some success when the Seahawks had 2 rookie tackles, and Geno Smith made his first Pro Bowl. But just here again is another situation where the Browns are hiring a coach from what I think most people would consider a more cutting edge offense. They're getting in more new ideas, obviously getting younger. This has been a theme for this, but just continuing to come up, bring in people who have been exposed to these different ways of doing things, whether it's Tommy Rees being right out of the college ranks. And that was like a thing that Kevin Stefanski specifically mentioned in the press conference, whether it's Ken Dorsey and both those guys have experience with quarterbacks who can win with their legs as well as their arm. It's just continuing. It's even as much as it's about the individual position, which is critical when you're the offensive line coach. It's about scheme and your ability to draw up an effective run blocking scheme and match it to your personnel and come up with the best way to pass protect. And, when you can't have Bill Callahan, I mean, these are huge shoes to fill, undoubtedly. Bill Callahan's one of the best in the world, but you can at least sort of see why the Browns are going in the direction they're going. They for anyone that thinks they're not going to change the offense, they're out of guys. It's Kevin Stefanski, Chad O'Shea, and everybody else is basically new in that building. It's going to be much different, and obviously with the focus being on Deshaun Watson.
And well, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, look at all these guys. Everybody's coming in from different types of backgrounds. Obviously, Reese from college. Deuce Staley has obviously had several homes, whether it was Philadelphia, whether it was Detroit. Obviously a brief stint down in Carolina, and obviously now bringing in someone from the side of influence. And I think a lot of it is okay, well what can I add? What can I take from a Deuce Staley? What can I take? Obviously from a Tommy Reese. What can I take? From today, obviously with bringing in Andy Dickerson, there is definitely going to be some changes here. And if you do not believe that is going to be the case, you're just being, I think, foolish and naive to yourself. And whether or not people believe the Albert Breer stuff, and to each your own or whatever. But after 4 years, I mean, you're not going to sit here and look at this offense and say it's been perfect. It's been, an absolute, something you're going to put in a Picasso, a Mona Lisa. It's just not been that. Can it be improved? Absolutely can be improved. Anything can be improved. And Kevin Stefanski, as much as he is a proud man, he's also not a foolish man. You need to understand that this, after a lot of years here with the Browns, if you look back at the 2023 season, the offense was the weak link, and the defense should either be equal, maybe even a little bit better in year two, and the offense needs to close that gap between the two units.
Yeah, I mean, look, whatever. There's this weird thing where up a couple weeks ago, the Alex Van Pelt of the world, people didn't know what he did and thought he brought no value because he didn't call plays. And now it's how can we possibly exist without Alex Van Pelt? And
Alex Van Pelt's been the offensive coordinator 4 years. Nobody poached him to ever come be a head coach. But how in the world can we let him go?
Yeah, I mean, I've been consistent. I think Alex Van Pelt was good for what the Browns were doing, but he was good at building an offense around Baker Mayfield and Joe Flacco. Those guys are irrelevant to what the Browns are doing now. They don't need to design an offense over a grab bag of quarterbacks that can do just enough while the defense does the heavy lifting. They need an offense that is great for Deshaun Watson. They need an offense that can run the ball better than it did last year when it died, when Nick Chubb went down for the year. It wasn't good, and people were complaining about this as it was going on. And I think the Joe Flacco thing, in as good as it was for the Browns, sort of really crystallized just what level of disconnect there was with what we were seeing from Watson. It was not a good fit, and that's their guy. There's no getting away from the fact that they have paid this guy $230 million. They've given up all these draft picks, so he's the priority. And if it's not working, let's also not forget that this was 2 years, not one. We like to sort of pretend that the first year didn't happen because he only played the 6 games. He was suspended, but he's literally, these coaches have been together with Deshaun Watson for 2 years, and it still looked clunky. What were we going to learn from another year? They had to make a change. They had to go in a different direction, and it's the priority. If this doesn't work, ultimately it's going to be a disaster. And I think in some ways, obviously, because of the way this last year played out, it sort of bailed out the fact that it wasn't working. Even though there are games where Deshaun Watson played well. He played great against the Titans, but the Titans scored 3 points. So it didn't really, it was sort of covered up by the fact you didn't really need him to be great. He was great against the Arizona Cardinals, who scored 0. So you're looking at this and going, yeah, the Ravens game, the second half was great. Personally, I think he was better against the Bengals than he gets credit for, but he's throwing that soaking wet cinder block. And it looked awful, but it's not where it needs to be. You brought him in to be a top 5, top 10 quarterback, and he's not right now. So this is the move to make.
There's no question. I mean, you really needed to, jumpstart this offense, and, for the first time after 4 years, you need to look at it and you need to do some own, self-reflection, self-scouting. And there's no question about it. This offense needs to be better. And obviously this is the plan and the thought with the moves that are made. We're going to continue on here. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined by the OBR's Pete Smith. Nobody go anywhere. Are you hosting on Sunday for the Super Bowl? Are you bringing food in? Are you cooking? Well, DoorDash can help you with any of that. All of your favorite restaurants and stores, from retail to grocery, are on the app, so you can shop for everything you need to get game day ready. Get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. It's not just food, retail items. You want some t-shirts in there. You want some decorations in there. You can find your local party store on the DoorDash app, have those things brought into the house, and have you and everybody ready for Super Bowl Sunday. It's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, subject to change. Terms apply. Don't forget to use code LOCK23 for 50% off up to $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change. Terms apply. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. We are the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on a 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. The big game is right around the corner. Prize Picks is the easiest, most exciting way to turn every game-changing moment into 100 times your money. With as little as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000. The big game. If Patrick Mahomes throws for more than 1 yard in the big game, you win on Prize Picks. You can put together a lineup, like I said, 2 to 6 players, over unders, Travis Kelce. You can look at, obviously, Isaiah Pacheco. You can look at Christian McCaffrey and put together yourself a nice line. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Pete, we've talked about all the change here within these coaching units. Obviously, Deuce Staley brought in. Certainly, Tommy Rees brought in the young guy, the new voice, the fresh voice coming up from college here. Certainly, the move today to bring in Andy Dickerson. And outside of offensive line coach, and not a knock on Dickerson, but, ain't nobody going to be Bill Callahan. The upgrades are there. And, you and I, we get this and we agree on this. It is about upping everything. And there's going to be obviously work to be done. Deuce Staley, there's probably going to be a significant name, whether it's the draft or free agents he brought into that running back room. All these positional rooms, obviously offensive line, because you're looking to make sure you have the best line here for 2024 and hopefully the best potential future for 25 beyond, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly the wide receiver room. There is work to be done. So not only are these guys going to be in here to scheme and work to get this offense to a higher level, there's also going to be talent to work with, because as we saw last year, they're not going to do all of this and just think they're going to run it back with all the same dudes.
No, and they've got, the defensive side of the ball has a lot of the young talent on this team. The offensive side of the ball has some, but if you look up and down the roster, you're sort of looking at some of this. And you see DeJuan Jones, you see Jerome Ford, you see Cedric Tillman, but like the defense, they don't have a whole lot of guys in the pipeline, and some of those positions, because they've had so much continuity, are starting to get older. And there's some elements where it's just they want to keep adding talent. Wide receivers certainly in that category where they just want to add more dudes now. Running back maybe in that category because we have no idea when Nick Chubb's going to be available. And Jerome Ford is, I think, a nice player, but I think they need more than that. And then the offensive line is the area where I sort of look at and go, what is this going to look like not only this year, but particularly in the very, very near future? Even if you believe Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin are going to be back on this team this coming year, which I have major questions about, you still are looking at this with Jed would not be back after this year. You have to at least – I think Conklin's issues are sort of overblown and that he's just got horrendous luck and he's the best tackle on the team. But at the same time, you have to be honest about the fact that he does get hurt and you have to at least plan for life after him. But I also look at guard, where at this point, I know Joe Patonio says he's coming back this coming year. I don't doubt that. But I do think at this point you have to be year to year with your expectations. And even then, 2025 is when his contract runs out. 2025 is when Wyatt Teller's contract runs out. And your guard of the future is who? I mean, Michael Dunn clearly is a capable backup, but he certainly wasn't paid as a unrestricted free agent with his opportunity to go anywhere else. It's not like he got a deal like Hjaldi Froholt did. He came back for basically the league minimum, but you don't have anybody behind those guys. And even if you're sitting there going, well, we don't need these guys to be ready for 2 years. Okay. But if somebody gets hurt or multiple people get hurt, like we had happen this year at tackle, you've got to have somebody else in there, and it cannot be Luke Whippler. So center is really the only position where you're sitting there going, we're pretty good. So I think both tackle and guard, one, you have to get cheaper because all 5 guys on projected starters make a lot of money. DeJuan Jones is the cheap contract because he's a rookie. But that's the other part of this. They need to develop their own homegrown talent, take advantage of rookie deals, and so they can continue to keep this team super competitive and not get weighed down by paying 5 different offensive linemen premium contracts. It's unrealistic. It's not sustainable, and it's going to pull away resources that you want to use on other spots.
And, to keep in mind, obviously, and look, it's not necessarily a knock on these guys, but, Jerron Christian and obviously, James Hudson, and not saying they were world beaters, but the Browns were very successful for a long period with these two playing without putting any money into the tackle position. You're certainly going to look at number 71, Jedrick Wills, and, can I put DeJuan Jones there, get equal, maybe even a little bit better play, and save myself $12 million, $13 million. Certainly a capable thing to do. I couldn't agree more. You look and you look at right now, you look at draft boards, you look at draft rankings, from where the Browns start in the 50s to even 200. Offensive tackle wise, you look at most of those draft boards, you're going to find 20, 21, 22 names. Offensive guard, you're going to find a dozen names between the 50s and 200. So look, you have to look at the ebbs and flows. You have to look at what's available. You have to look at what you need. And for the Browns, all of this is there. So yes. And, you're in a pretty fortunate spot where technically right now you have 6 starting offensive linemen, which is a very, very great situation to be in. Something's going to have to give here, obviously. And we'll see the way it works out here. The Browns are not running a charity. They're not worried about, everybody's families eating. They need to get themselves to the next level. And, you're getting to the point now where after you did go to the playoffs and it didn't work out, you have to make difficult decisions. And unfortunately, some guys that may have been held in high regard, it's just the way it is. You might get moved on from, because nobody's going to sit around and say, well, let's hope that every single guy who underperformed last year takes a leap. It's just not the way it works. You bring in competition, you bring in better people, because that is what your job is to do. And that's certainly something that Andrew Berry and his team are going to have to tackle this offseason. We're going to continue going on here. Your latest Locked On Browns continues. Jeff Lloyd, the OBR's Pete Smith, along for the ride. Look, sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. Look, I got something big that's aggravating me right now, but that ain't my story to tell right now. I'm sick of winter. We got one more week of football. I am ready to take the Rip Van Winkle nap and get myself to late July. Heck, I'll even take June. Summer, I want it. I'm already missing football season, and it hasn't even left yet. Here's the thing. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sport team, and it's important to get these things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Closing out your latest Locked On Browns, your host, Jeff Lloyd. We are joined by Pete Smith. I appreciate you all for making Locked On Browns your first listen every single day. The everyday crowd, if you are not in right by now, make a new plan. Stand, subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Shows always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Pete, much like last year, and even like, and this is, if you think it's too much, they don't need to do all that. Last year, this team had Myles Garrett, signed Ogbenai Okoronkwo, had a player on the rise, first-year player Alex Wright going into his second year, drafted Isaiah McGuire, had other DNs on the roster, and still after all that, made a move for a player like Zadarius Smith. So if you think it's something they won't do, and as far as the offensive side of the ball is concerned, that is something that is going to happen this season. Pete, obviously, help is going to be needed at the running back position. As you stated, I'm trying to tell everybody here, the everydayers, we have no idea what Nick Chubb can give this team this year. The wide receiver room, look, Amari Cooper, 2 great years with this team. Elijah Moore, I think, was probably a little better than maybe some people want to give credit for. David Njoku was fantastic. The offensive line. Pete, there are needs here on the offensive side of the ball, and that's not even talking about who will be quarterback 2. Could be DTR, but you're still going to bring in a third one. Rank these needs. I mean, like, what do they actually need? Because, ranking this, there's a lot of work to be done on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think the top thing they want is another veteran wide receiver. And to your point about trading, look, there's 2 things going on here. The draft is very shallow this year just by numbers. And
it's also, to be fair, it might be draft by filling guys being able to fill Brown's parameters. As far as age is going to be a big thing here, and it's going to be a big thing to come for years to come for the Browns, where guys just may not fit that box for them, and that could automatically be the red X.
Perhaps. But the other part is, like, there are a whole lot of teams that tried to spend big. The Chargers stand out because they had Justin Herbert in his 5th-year option. Burrow and Lamar Jackson are starting into their real contracts. So there are teams that are going to be over the cap that are looking to unload salary, not unlike the Vikings did last year with Zadarius Smith. And the Browns have all these day 3 picks where they can go, hey, I'll take I can create some money. I can make that space where I will take a very good player, not unlike they did with Smith, not unlike they did with Amari Cooper, where that could be a scenario where they add more talent like that. I think there's going to be options in the marketplace. Wide receiver certainly stands out, but there may be another defensive guy in that, in the same way that Zadarius Smith was. I think that's the top thing right now. I think if they did nothing else, that would be the thing they have to do. But to me, the second thing becomes line, even though it's not theoretically for this year, although I certainly look at it for this year. I just, for all the things we talked about, depth, just getting talent in there that can compete, getting guys that can, ease the financial burden, and, make sure that this team doesn't get, that position doesn't get old out from under them. These are all real concerns. And then you get into things like tight end and running back, where, yes, the Browns definitely could use more running back help. There's certainly players I wouldn't mind taking early in this draft, because even if with Nick Chubb, they're going to have to look to life after Nick Chubb in some form or fashion. Even if they want to do it with a veteran, a stopgap, at some point they're going to have to start looking for the next guy. That could be this year, depending on how the value plays out. And then tight end, it's not a great tight end class, but we'll see what happens. I think they'd like to keep Harrison Bryant, but he's a free agent again, and we'll see what they want to do there. But here's another position that becomes sort of an opportunity, where if you're sitting there at some point in the draft and somebody's sitting there and you go, I love this guy, especially early, and you're sitting there looking at a team like the Baltimore Ravens with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, and you're going, hey, I'd like to be able to do that. Not only because of what they can offer you in the passing game, just different ways to run block. And I think getting back to owning the line of scrimmage is going to be such a huge focus for the Browns. I'm not saying that this is what they're going to do, but it suddenly let's say they love Jatavian Sanders from Texas, and he's just sitting there, and they go, "Hey, it's too good to be true." This just becomes a major opportunity for us to just hammer home and go to David Njoku and another good tight end and Amari Cooper and all these other things. I think that becomes sort of the the sort of the dessert type option where you don't need to do this, but hey, you may just love it that much, and you go with that. So I think the running back and sort of tight end round out the bottom. But yeah, wide receiver and offensive line, I think, are the top two.
And look, I mean, because and the wide receiver obviously makes the most sense because, we told everybody, we spent so much time talking about how we thought the evolution of the Cleveland Browns in 2023 was how this team was going to become more focused, more centric on Deshaun Watson. Obviously, his arm, his throwing ability, all of those things. Obviously, the injury to Nick Chubb, obviously the injury to Deshaun Watson. There was never really a verdict on basically what that was going to be here for 2023. But the moves that are being made right now, and then eventually the player personnel that will be brought in, obviously are going to reflect all of that. Browns have work to do. And, as great as 11-6 was, the goal is to be better. The goal is to obviously be, 13-4. The goal is for a damn playoff game to be played in Cleveland, so you don't have to worry about where you're going. This is all about what is being done right now in Berea and what will be done for the months to come. He is Pete Smith, now part of the OBR. Make sure you check everything out over there. Pete's doing a fantastic job. Show with Brad Ward early in the week. Obviously, always the podcast with Bree, so make sure you're checking out all that stuff. Make sure you're following @_Pete Smith_ myself, Jeff Lloyd. Again, appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen. If you are not in on the everyday crowd by now, make sure you correct that and subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on ELOB. Let's go Browns.